this is lots of knowledge stuff. To apply it, that's divine wisdom, and that's what you ultimately want to do. And so why are we doing this? We're doing this so we will be wise in God's eyes and understand that, that the Nephilim and giants, they're evidently part of the divine narrative. And so I do want to understand this.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Buried Bible Podcast. I am the layman, Keagan Walz, here with the chillest Mesopotamian scholar on this side of the Mississippi, Mark Chavalas.
I'm here. I don't have a retort to that.
He is impressed with me as always. Well, we actually do have a little bit of exciting news before we dive into our wrap-up episode of the Nephilim. We are excited to share that we've officially hit 1,000 subscribers. So, pretty exciting stuff. We're very excited about that, and we're excited that you guys have tuned in and enjoyed it. But me and Mark have talked about it, and more than anything, I think we're just excited to see the amount of people who have a hunger for the Bible, understanding it better, digging into some of the context and the weeds of the Bible, again, to better understand the Bible itself, but ultimately there's this hunger for people for truth and for Jesus and knowing him more deeply and knowing his word more deeply. And so I think we are very excited and blessed that you guys are enjoying it, but equally as excited just to see the hunger that's out there for this kind of material. So we're very excited we are very excited about that. So
I agree. It's very gratifying and overwhelming.
There you go. Well, awesome. And so, yeah, we are back here for the wrap-up episode of the Nephilim. So if you haven't already, make sure to watch those other ones. We've had a somewhat extensive, kind of a short one. You could go on for a long time on this stuff. But today we want to wrap up the Nephilim, do a couple wrap-up questions, because in case you're like me, I got to kind of digest it, chew on it for a little bit, and hear things 2 or 3 times to really start to get a grasp on things. So I'm excited to dive back in and wrestle with a couple things, even some comments that you guys have been putting out there. And so, Mark, I want to just start out by asking this question of, because I think sometimes when you talk about something that is just so briefly mentioned in the Bible, people, a lot of times the initial response is, well, why does it really matter? Or, oh, it's not that big of a deal, which I'm not implying in my question that this is absolutely necessary for everybody to do. But there is importance and significance in studying these things in depth and in the weeds, something that seems like either vague or not important. And so my question would be, why is a topic matter like the Nephilim important to our understanding of the Bible as a whole and just like the Christian walk, when most people would think it's not super important, but I would argue there is importance.
Well, maybe I'll start off with a personal note, and I talked a little bit about this in the first episode. By the way, when you really want context for looking at these things, please look at my earlier episodes where we really tried to establish a foundation for how you understand the Bible in its ancient Near Eastern context. And it also, I think, helps clarify some of the things that I do in later podcasts. Sometimes the comments will show a person has not looked at the earlier ones. But anyway, on a personal note, I think that as a young man, I became really enraptured in understanding ancient Mesopotamia and the Bible, but it was really more of an intellectual pursuit, and I really did not connect it to a faith stance. When I became a truly committed Christian, then I was able to put all of these things into context. So there's always that temptation to start studying all of this material for its own sake, which, by the way, I think would be perfectly fine. But as a believer, I want to look at this material and try to understand it from that framework. So here we are with an entire Bible. And does it matter? Well, perhaps it doesn't matter in terms of my ultimate salvation destiny, but Mowing the lawn might not either. Being kind to Keagan, which sometimes is really hard, that's that's a thing that matters, from one standpoint or another. And so I think that you need to put this in its proper context. It's in the Bible. It's stated in the Bible. And so I want to do everything I can to try to understand it in its proper context. Do I go a little bit further than some of you might be happy with? Perhaps that's true, but I want to really, literally, not leave any stone unturned. Is that overturned? To try to understand as much as I can, and then realize this certainly isn't as important as other doctrines in the Bible in some respects, except they're all interconnected. And so if I look at it from that standpoint, and I see that they're interconnected, it helps tweak my understanding of Scripture and its theological truths through the lens of, the original ancient Near Eastern context of this material. And so, that's a brief answer to it, is that, and so it's not just the Nephilim, it's studying anything. It's studying Babylonian law codes, Babylonian flood epics, to try to understand them from the context, to put the biblical material in their proper context, to understand them as an ancient person would understand them, not as a modern. If I want to apply this material, I think quite often is that we want to apply the Bible immediately without any prism. And the prism, of course, is the ancient Near East. Once I understand how it's meant in an ancient Near Eastern context, then I can better apply it. It doesn't necessarily contradict things that I might understand from a 21st century perspective, but it really hones in on what's truly and precisely important. And so it modifies my understanding and hopefully helps crystallize things. Does it cause confusion in other areas? Yes. But like I keep on saying, that I'm quite willing to live with that confusion, because really the whole thing is ultimately up to God, not with my powers of interpretation.
Yeah, and then what would you add in terms of specifically Nephilim? Because I think, again, even for me, I would say, okay, I understand that. I understand the bigger picture of context does matter. But then I'd go, okay, but the Nephilim is so briefly talked about. How does understanding them, the Nephilim and the sons of God rightly, how is that going to change or give me deeper understanding on Scripture as a whole?
Well, and I think part of this is going to be a summary of tidbits that I said, especially over the past 4 sessions. And you're making me think theologically now, not that I can't do
goal.
it, but it's, but how do I want to say this? When you look at the context to the flood with the Nephilim, and the fact that they are mentioned obliquely later on as if it's something that everyone in the Jewish world would already understand, and to find out the traditions are greatly elaborated on by other Jewish writings. And then, of course, with the Mesopotamian context to this, there's a whole lot more going on there. That means a Jewish person looking and listening to the first couple of verses in Genesis 6 has a much better framework for understanding it than we do. So I want to know that. And it also shows me that the writer is also very aware that the relationship between God and humans is one aspect of God's economy. He has a relationship with heavenly beings, and why aren't we told much about it? Because it's probably not our primary purview. And I think that what often happens even in Christendom is that people, once they start studying the Nephilim, they began to lose sight what the primary purpose is. It's to understand our relationship with God and how it can be restored. God has offered us a way to have our relationship restored to Him, through His Son Christ. You might take a left turn if you keep on studying the Nephilim for its own sake, but if you study it, realize, oh, there's a whole lot more going on in the heavenly realm than we had, than we understood before. And then like I said before, when it became pretty much secularized, little by little through the Middle Ages, but certainly by the scientific revolution, we're not thinking in this way, and so we can easily dismiss this material. I really don't know exactly how it works out, but from a theological standpoint, it does appear that there's a much bigger rebellion scenario with God. We know about it with the devil, but it's much, much more complicated and much more thorough than we would understand by simply looking at a traditional view of the biblical text. And so now this, I don't know, maybe gives me a greater respect for the fact that there's a whole lot more going on out there that I don't understand. And the Nephilim issue has confirmed that. And so when Paul talks about principalities and powers, he's not just throwing out words. He's using very specific terminology, and his audience knows what he's talking about. And he knows what he's talking about. It's us that have to recover it. So, for example, when Paul talks to the Ephesians, Ephesians was the center of magic in the Greco-Roman world. And so, when he's throwing these terms out, it's very well understood by the audience. And the audience, of course, many of them, since most of them are probably Gentiles, they just came out of Greco-Roman, paganism, which is thoroughly engrossed in the magic arts. And of course, in the magic arts, what are you doing? You're calling up, spiritual beings and hybrid beings and demonic beings, etc., because they could be of use to you. You look at, people used to think, well, the Greeks and the Romans were intellectual. Well, yes, they were, but they also had this irrational side. I think I mentioned E.R. Dodd's The Greeks and the Irrational, that he wrote in the 50s, but they're thoroughly engrossed in the magic arts in every aspect of their life, and so were the Mesopotamians. And so a little tidbit of this is looking at the spiritual world in the Bible, showing that they have an understanding of the same thing, except that they condemn it. They condemn the worship of magic, and we're going to do a podcast on magic at some point too, by the way, just in magic in particular. But the pagans are coming out of this. I think Abraham was coming out of this, in my opinion, when he's called by God, in Genesis 12. And so it really is important to try to understand this context, that it's much bigger than our earthly realm, and it's much bigger than simply our relationship, humans, with God. Though that's our primary purpose and understanding, that there's a much bigger dimension to it, and this is sort of a tiny window into it.
Yeah, because that's what I'd say it kind of does for me, or it makes you at least wrestle with, is this the reality and how big and broad the spiritual realm is. Because we a lot of times think of it as this one-to-one. Well, me and God. Well, I know Satan tries to attack me, blah blah blah. But there, like you said, there's so much going on behind the scenes that we don't see. And reading the Nephilim and understanding it the way they do would give us a wider lens into the supernatural world. And
sometimes I hate to use examples that I don't think about until later on, but you think about it. When Copernicus figured out that stars were not equidistant to the Earth, then of course our conception of the universe blew up. Like, wow, things are much, much bigger than we ever would have thought. That's sort of scary. If you think of this from the standpoint, oh my goodness, the heavenly realm, there's a whole lot more going on there than we would ever imagine. I think it almost gives me this healthy respect that I thought we were puny before, but now it's like, wow. And God, but look at it from this standpoint, we're so puny and we're made out of dust, and God clearly makes us think that we're his primary concern. It's like, really? In spite of all this, in spite of, a war in heaven and what's going on, God has taken us and made us something that will be higher than the sons of God. Whatever that means. From a theological standpoint, it's like, mind-blowing. And so for us to try to get a little handle on this, if we simply do it for its own sake, yeah, I would say that's a fun hobby. But ultimately, this has got to have a spiritual dimension to it. And if sometimes I miss that, then shame on me. And maybe someone like Keagan is going to be able to, pull me back in. Well, that was really irrelevant. Tell me, give me some application to that. Okay. Because, I have that temptation to go into the weeds and then study this material for its own sake. And then I can be brought back to the real world by Keagan and then people like you, that can help me, understand that this has got to have a real application to it.
Yeah. No, and I think that's a good analogy, because I think we can often read stories like the Nephilim or giants, and we kind of look at it like the star analogy of this 2D narration. They're just these characters in this storybook, when all of a sudden you realize, they're not equidistant to the earth, and all of a sudden you kind of like actually go out and you see the depth and how big the universe actually is, and that they're not just these pointy things up in a tapestry, but there's depth and expanse to them. I think that's a good analogy in terms of just how we view the Bible, that they're all of a sudden, when it doesn't just become this story, but there's this actual real life reality to the supernatural world that's happening and going on around us that we don't see. It provides that depth, and all of a sudden, again, they're not just these 2D things, it becomes 3D. So I like that.
Oh, 2D. I thought you said 2D. I'm thinking, what's the word? All right. Thank you.
No, 2D.
That's
not
my
2D.
my hearing issue. But
there you go. All right. I'll speak up a little bit. But so now, always a good one. So going back into, let's start with the last episode a little bit. My follow-ups would be talking about the Apkallu, not the Acapulco, whatever, the Apkallu. You talk about the 7 wise sages, and a lot of the things that you were mentioning was revolved around the number 7. And so, is there significance in that, tying in the Mesopotamian number 7 with the significance of the number 7 we see throughout Scripture?
Yes, I think there is, and it's subtle, by the way, because there's no particular passage, whether in Mesopotamian sources or in biblical sources, that will tell you, the number 7 is, special and different than all the other numbers. But if you look at all the text as a whole, you begin to see a pattern. So I looked up a couple of articles. One of them, by the way, I think is really cool. If you've never seen a little online journal called The Torah, Torah, look it up. It's done. It's a Jewish publication, but the scholars in there have a healthy respect to the Bible, and they use pointy-headed scholars that are practicing Jews, practicing Christians, and others. And so, in other words, they like articles from really, really good scholars, but they do it for a public venue. And so the article I looked up is entitled 7, the Biblical Number. The author is Elaine Goodfriend, by the way. And I had forgotten that I had actually met her once. She's one of her jobs is a lecturer at Cal State Northridge, which was my alma mater, and I taught there for a number of years, and then I came back and gave a lecture there about a decade or so ago. And I remember, I didn't realize this until I started reading this. I met this person, and she was, I believe, a student of Jacob Milgrom, and I was sort of making fun of the fact that Milgrom, wrote a 3,500-page commentary on Leviticus, and who would do that? And she says, "Yep, I was one of his last students." I said, "Oh, did I say anything embarrassing?" "Oh, no." But anyway, she has that really cool article. I don't remember exactly when she wrote this, but I want to just maybe read a few excerpts of this article that I think will help understand that concept of the number 7. So she says the number 7 comes up explicitly in many narratives. And so this is a literary thing that is going to be understood best by someone as a biblical Hebrew scholar, but I think that it can still be seen, in an English translation. So, for example, pretty obvious creation. God creates 6 days. On the seventh day, he rests. And, you think about it, each of the days usually, as I talked about in one of the early podcasts, each of the first 6 days has a corresponding days. Day 1 and day 4, day 2 and day 5, day 3 and day 6 certainly are correspondings for a variety of reasons, but day 7 stands alone. And in the biblical section, you have all sorts of things about rituals and laws. Every 7 years is the Jubilee. Debts are canceled. Hebrew slaves are freed after the 7th year. Animals are ready for sacrifice after 7 days have passed. Lots and lots of little things like that. But from a literary standpoint, there's all sorts of things. For example, let's see. Jacob works for Laban. The key word work, the word for work or labor occurs 7 times in the narrative. And of course, we know that he works for 7 years for each of Laban's daughters. Go figure that. So it's no accident that this term is being used over and over again. And I thought she had a nice note about the ancient Near Eastern background about this. She says, I'll paraphrase. I'll just read a paragraph or two. Various factors have contributed to the importance of the number 7. For example, Mesopotamian astronomers knew of 7 heavenly bodies. Now, by the way, I'm going to talk about this with the Anunnaki, but in Mesopotamia, we normally think, well, they knew 5 planets. Well, no, for them it was 7 planets, and this is their 7 planets. The sun and the moon, they're heavenly bodies. They don't differentiate between the sun and the moon and other heavenly bodies. Saturn, Venus, Jupiter, Mars, and Mercury. Not Nibiru, by the way. We'll talk about that pretty soon, too. And if you have heard of the word Zecharia Sitchin, if you have his books, do something with them, but don't read them. Please, I'll explain why. Because of the deification of astral bodies, 7 became identified with holiness and perfection. This is Mesopotamia. And then she quotes someone, as a symbol of the heavens, the number 7 came to stand for wholeness and harmony, even perfection. Then in terms of mathematics, and this is, by the way above my pay grade, and I have another article, an unpublished article by a Japanese sumerologist by the name of Muroi, M-U-R-O-I. Look him up on academia.edu, and he's got all sorts of articles on proto-Elamite numbers, which of course everyone knows about. I mean, most people were thinking I didn't even know Elamite, let alone proto-Elamite, but it's a thing, by the way. But she says, back to good friend. In addition, the appeal of 7 as a significant number may relate to its unique status among the digits from 1 to 10. 7 is a prime number, okay. But, we use, as you probably know, we use a decimal system, like based on 10. You knew that?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Math, the one good subject I ever had in school.
Now, as I think I mentioned this, in Mesopotamia, their system was based on 60, okay. Now, that really messes things up when you want to, divide and subtract, etc. So I'm going to say these statements, and I'm not sure that I can explain what she's saying, but some of you out there, math geeks, are going to understand this really well. According to the standards of Babylonian mathematics, 7 is also the first non-regular number because it is not divisible by 2, 3, or 5. Okay, in addition, 7 is unallied with any other number. The numbers 2, 4, 6, and 8, indeed all numbers are brothers, etc., including the number 9. And this Japanese sumerologist, tries to show why this is, by the way, in terms of mathematics. And so let me look at, like I said, this is an unpublished article. So I know, how did I get it? Just, that's... he says, since the number 7 is the first natural number that has such a property that is indivisible, it could not be expressed by a finite sexagesimal fraction, unlike any other number before it. My head gasket is blowing right now. So somebody out there is I'm sure you're gonna be schooling me on this. Go for it. I'm ready to subject myself. Since the number 7 is the first natural number that has such a property, it was of particular interest to them and became the representative of their number mysticism. The mystical number 7 was, so to speak, born in the rational mind of the Sumerians and grew in the irrational mind of the same people. I'm not sure what he means by that. And it spread all over the world. And of course, he, as a Japanese person, he says, wait, we have lucky 7 gods. And of course, in English, lucky number 7, etc. And so, and by the way, for the Sumerians, signs, the cuneiform signs and numbers all have mystical value to them. I might go into that at some point. And so when you find the first number that cannot be divisible in your sexagesimal system, this might have been the reason why 7 ultimately have this powerful significance. And of course, that spills over into all of the ancient Near East, including the Hebrews. And so I'm not saying it has a magical number. It has a power number, a significant number in the biblical mindset. And so from that standpoint, this is probably why we can see it. And so the number 7 keeps on coming up. You see it in the Psalms. You see it in the Proverbs. And so it has deep value. And this Murroy fellow saying that it might be because of its uniqueness in the sexagesimal system. That might be the mundane reason for it. Does it have a significance to God? I don't know.
There you go. People, there's people out there going, oh, I'll actually correct Mark, or there's people going, really? We're talking math on this podcast. One of those.
And I'm sticking to it.
There you go. So then I guess my next question, which still a big one for me in terms of wrestling, which would be, no matter which stance you take, which we obviously have heard through our podcast, what stance you take on sons of God and the Nephilim and where you fall on that. But no matter what, you have to deal with the fact that the Nephilim are before and after the flood. And I know we touched on it a little bit, but I thought maybe we could grapple with that a little bit more. I find it interesting, and I don't know if there are, and it's not touched on a lot, right? So a lot of it's just not guessing, but
hey, thanks.
But there's just not a whole lot of material from the biblical text to be able to come to a conclusion. So I understand some of it is theorizing, but what are some of the main theories, or where do you land on that? How did that happen before and after?
I'm gonna tell you, I probably already said this in some of the podcasts, but I'm going to live with the tension of not being able to figure this out and not to worry about it because of that. How are there Nephilim before the flood and after the flood? Are they a different category than the other human beings that are destroyed? When, of course, when it says all flesh, what does that mean? Is this hyperbolic? Which, by the way, Scripture uses hyperbole all the time. That's one possibility. Is the flood localized? I'm not even going to go there because I don't know. That's way above my pay grade. I'm going to assume it's not. But I don't know how that fleshes out. To make a bad pun on all flesh. Does it mean that if the Nephilim are not categorized in the same way as humans, then are they not? Are they subject to death in the body? But then they're spiritual. They're spiritual beings that are now still alive, and then they reclaim other human bodies. I don't know. I mean, you can sit there and say all these things that might make sense, but the biblical text doesn't seem to be on the alert as to what our questions are, in the sense that I don't think they're necessarily seeing that tension like we are. And so it's not an issue to be resolved. In the same way, like, wait a minute, what swallowed Jonah? Well, the Bible says it was a great fish. Well, Does that mean it's not a whale because it's called a fish? No, in Hebrew taxonomy, you got a big animal that swims around in the ocean. They're all categorized as fish, and so, but no, a whale is a mammal. Well, their answer was, you're using different categories. And so I just think that if we could have the original author sitting before us and we would ask him that question, they probably would be scratching their head. Really? You're worried about that question? I don't even address it here. Why are you worried about that question? So I'm, again, I think it's fun to try to study as long as I don't get flustered with the fact that I'm, with the lack of evidence that we have, it can't be done. I'm trying to remember, I didn't look this up, whether or not rabbinical sources struggle with this. I'm going to guess that since they struggle with everything else and every other question under the sun, there probably is a struggle somewhere with this issue, but I don't remember seeing it. But again...
Yeah, well, because that was going to be my follow-up then, which is, I understand it's a bit of speculation. There's not a whole lot to go on. But what about some of the other, either Jewish material or other extra-biblical texts out there? Do they give any even hint of how, is it a new set of fallen angels, or how, do they have a theory? Not
that I'm aware of, and of course I tried to be somewhat exhaustive in looking at those Jewish sources, 2 or 3 podcasts ago. But again, that's not my primary wheelhouse. And so it's very possible that I missed something. And I also did not look at later rabbinical tradition about this. And so it's very possible that in later rabbinical tradition, somebody's there, with that same type of question, and maybe I can look this up to try and figure it out. But once I do, it's new territory for me.
Got it. So then, going off that same kind of vein, when we're looking at the Nephilim, some people make big emphasis on the Nephilim are the main reason why God allows the Israelites to wipe out entire people groups. Do you see that? Or where is, in some of these conquests that we see, what role does the Nephilim play in those conquests?
If you simply read the biblical text without any later traditions, they seem quite marginal. And when I say Nephilim, I mean giants, because of course the Nephilim are described with different words. You think about it, the word Nephilim is just, the Septuagint translate the word as giants, and so that's sort of pretty generic. And so what does the Bible usually use? It uses the ethnic term or the national term for each group, the Amim or the Rephaim or whatever it is. And so they're more concerned about that than they are about using just the generic term giants, which, you think about it, like I brought up, it's only mentioned, as an explanatory term in Deuteronomy, and then we have the root used by Ezekiel, which is probably not even addressing the giants at that point, just about the fallen ones in the underworld, and so they're not making a big deal about it, because if you really look and ask an Israelite, why are you going into doing this? They're talking about the corruptness of the Canaanite world, that it's irredeemable. And so they are, and you think about it, Leviticus 18, when God's now talking to the Israelites about their sexual practices, he says, remember where you came from in Egypt. Don't do what they do. And remember where you're going into, the Canaanites. Don't do what they do. They're corrupt. They're irredeemable in their practices. And so that is emphasized much more than the fact that there are also giants there. I think that if you simply read the Bible, that seems to be an aside. It doesn't mean that it's necessarily marginal. It just means that it's not the prime mover if you simply read the biblical text. And like I said, the Jewish world has a much larger expose about this material, which you can provide as a larger context. But you would think it would be mentioned more often in the biblical text. It's there, it's real. It's just, it's not as, I suppose, not as sensational. And so I think that sometimes, and I've been reading, I was asked by one viewer, hey, why don't you get so-and-so to come on? I'm not even say the person's name. And I looked him up and said, wow, they really emphasize this to, to the 100th degree. And then when I found out this person was getting their material, some of their material from this Zechariah Sitchin guy, I said, okay, that's, this is way too sensational. I'm trying really hard to look at this in its proper biblical context. And if it means that it's subordinated to the fact that the Canaanite world is corrupt and needs to be, turned on its head in every way, and the ancient Near Eastern world as a whole, then the concept of giants becomes secondary.
Okay. Yeah, no, that makes sense. Because, other people do have more of an emphasis on... I guess how I'd frame it is, so do you see the Nephilim being part of... They're just a subset of, and maybe a major part, but a subset of this corruption that already exists, as opposed to they're the main emphasis of the rebellion? Because you could look at it those two ways, right? Especially when you bring in kind of more of the Apkallu mindset of, okay, these fallen angels come, have relations with women, they give birth to these giants and whatever. Now, however far you want to take it of, okay, how much do they give them in terms of wisdom and all this other stuff? But are they the spreaders of the corruption, which is why we have to wipe out the Nephilim and these hybrid creatures, which then would make the corruption the result, a major result of the Nephilim, as opposed to, no, they're just a subset of, well, the Nephilim were also corrupt. Does that make sense?
I think it's a subset because if you took the first couple of verses of Genesis 6 out, it would make the flood story much harder to comprehend. But I suppose it's kind of like the devil. I mean, what did the old comic Flip Wilson always say when he would do something snarky? Well, the devil made me do it. Well, that has a theological principle to it. But if there was no devil, the humans would still be, they still would have been tempted by rebellion at some point. In other words, without the devil, would we have been tempted? I don't know. I'm not going to go there theologically, but without the Nephilim, they might be a catalyst to the flood story, but humans were already sinners at that point. And so they might have helped us along in the same way that, you might have been tempted, and you might argue that, oh, I was tempted by the devil to do such and such. And God's going to say, but you still did such and such.
Yeah.
So you're still responsible for your sin.
So they could have expedited the time or the speed in which the corruption was happening.
Yeah. And by the way, when I'm saying this is just, here's our theological, speculation right now, because the Bible simply does not explicitly state any of this. And so it's a fun speculation as long as you don't become dogmatic about it or take it too seriously. But it's important to investigate it, and that's why I've done this, in 4 and now our 5th session on it.
Yeah. And so then I guess going back to...
Because Keagan keeps on having questions.
Oh, I keep having questions, but like I said at the beginning of the episode, I think it's more of I need to go back, digest it, chew on it for a bit, and then even questions that you answered, it's I kind of almost need to ask it in a different way to see it from a different perspective. I need to hear it 2-3 times to still not really fully understand it, if we're being honest.
That cow example of digestion is really it's so moving. I'm sorry.
Mark's been waiting the entire episode to throw that joke.
Somebody called me a Gentile cattle or whatever, and I just thought that was utterly ridiculous. But the experience was very moving. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'm not gonna lie, that's pretty good. Well, and that's also on par with. I mean, we had a little bit of a comedy in our comment section, so
A little bit, yeah.
it was pretty cool. So I guess going back to more of the Apkallu episode, I guess since that was our last one, that's fresh on my mind. But you had talked about these people doing the incantations and stuff. You talked about them having to name the things or the beings. And so my follow-up question, which I wish I would have asked when we were there, but again, I guess I'm a little bit slow.
We're here now.
My question would be, is that similar to what we see in terms of, well, I guess I want to add a little bit. So we see the 7 wise sages. You had said the word legion, I think, in the last one, which makes me think of Legion from the New Testament, the 7 demons. And then we also see like these demons being named. Is there significance or any correlation between the two, or is it again just that they're in the same world?
Well, naming, naming is really, really important in the ancient Near Eastern world. And by the way, I think still in the modern Near East too. Living amongst the Syrian people, as I would do for 2 or 3 months of the year for, in all my digs, I really learned a lot about their life and their experiences. In many respects, some of the towns I lived in were not like Nazareth might have been 2,000 years ago, or a Mesopotamian town in many respects, and their worldview is got lots of similarities. And so the name of something represents, it's not simply a name, it also represents their character. You think of in the Bible, it's no accident that when David has a relationship with Abigail, her husband is called Nabal. I'm anglicizing it. And of course, that's probably not the name mom and dad gave him, because it means fool. And of course, why is he called fool? Because that represents his essence. He's a complete and utter fool in what he does. And of course, because of that, has a bad ending to it. And so, and by the way, this does not occur in every single case with every name, but it does attach significance to it. Abel means vapor. That's probably not the name that mom and dad gave him when he was born, but that's that represents his character trait, that he was there. And then if he's, let's say, the first person to die, at least the first person to die in Scripture, he's gone. He's like a vapor. He's just a memory at this point. And so he's now categorized as vapor, memory. So in God, when he speaks his name to Moses, by the way, that wasn't completely brand new, because there must have been a name recognition that if you tell those Israelites that Yahweh has sent you, they'll know who I am. And of course, Abraham uses that term at the very beginning, and he makes an oath in the end of Genesis 14. He's making it to Yahweh, God Most High. And so that's God's personal name. It represents his character, he that causes things to come into existence. In many respects, that's why I think in the Septuagint it becomes Ho-On, the being, the creator being, because that's, if you think about it, that's the thing that makes him wholly other than us. So when Joshua comes to the heavenly being in chapter 5, when this random passage where the heavenly being sort of shows up to Joshua, and Joshua, sees him and says, "Are you for us or against us?" I'm making old-fashioned terms. I don't think it's King James. Like, whose side are you on? And what's your name? And he says, "What are you asking me for?" And then, of course, the same thing happens with Samson's parents. They asked the name of the heavenly being, and he says, "I'm not telling you anything like and think about it. Jacob wrestles with an angel, and he asks him his name and doesn't get an answer. It's as if I know your deep essence, I might have some power or control over you. And by the way, this is also a Mediterranean thing. It's not simply ancient Near East. So if you're participating in a mystery religion in the Greco-Roman world, you would go through some rituals that would look, excuse me, superficially like Christianity. You make a statement of belief, of baptism, some sort of formula, renouncing something, possibly. If you have some sort of miraculous out-of-body experience or heavenly experience, then you might get to the next level where you know something, and maybe even a sacred name of the god or goddess that you're entering into a relationship with you. And it's secret information that only you know. And it's a mysterion. It's a mystery that you're not supposed to tell anyone else. That's why when Paul says things like, behold, I tell you a mystery, he's basically spilling the beans to everybody. Hey, this was a secret, and I'm telling all of you, don't tell anybody, hint, hint, ha, ha. But now everybody gets to know what the mystery is. We shall not all, we're all not going to die. There's a resurrection. Oh, by the way, Gentiles and Jews get to eat together, and they're going to be one people group someday. Because, the big to do in the first century that we often misunderstand is that Jewish Christians were having a problem with having, Gentiles come in. What do we do with them? How do we absorb them? Maybe we can discuss this at some point. So the whole issue of this naming thing is it's power. There's power in somebody's name. It's not simply the personal name. It's the essence of the person. So, we obviously have lost that in the modern age. And so if how'd you get your name? Oh, my parents thought it sounded nice. By the way, I'm not belittling that. All I'm saying is that we just have a different way of understanding things.
You just described how we named our sons.
But that's okay. I mean, in other words, this is our culture and our age. And so, if I remember asking my mom recently, like, okay, so I know you named me Mark. I'm pretty sure I know why, but can you confirm it? Oh yeah, we were looking for a Bible name, and we named you William because that's the name of your grandfather, anglicized from Vasilios, etc. And so she gave me the explanation. I said, all right, that's cool. If she would have said, well, we named you Mark because, we found it on the back of a cereal box or whatever, or gee, Mom.
Well, no, it's the movie credits. There's some unique names
yes,
on movie credits.
Right. But so we don't look at the naming something in the same way that the ancient Near Eastern peoples and others did, and so it's very significant. And like I said, my name will often reflect my personhood and the essence of what I am. And so, if you call God by His name, it means by His whole. Or if you know Him by name, it doesn't mean that you know His personal name. It means that you know His full and character in an intimate way. One last thing I'm thinking of, and I don't think I brought this up before, but I remember when I was teaching at Cal State Northridge years and years ago, I would often have lots and lots of Jewish students, and I lived in the Los Angeles, and I think probably 1 out of every 3 of my friends and acquaintances were Jewish, and so it just permeated. So it was very common for me to have lots of Jewish students in a classroom. And one day I'm talking about ancient Israel and the God of Israel and the name of the God of Israel, and I remember writing the 4 letters on the board, YHWH, and out in California, students were not shy to sort of blurt out questions, and so I had a Jew student, raise his hand. What is that? I said, oh, that's the divine name of the God of Israel. He says, I've never seen it written down. And of course, for them, you write down Hashem, which just means the name. You don't write the name down because that's the essence of that divine being. We don't see it that way anymore. And I think even now in the New Testament, when you think of God as your daddy, it's like, well, what's his personal name? It's Daddy. I call him Daddy. Oh, by the way, oh yeah, he's the king of the universe too. Yeah. But
Abba, Father.
Yes. Yep. And so that really is a significant change that you're not supposed to remove the respectful part, but you're adding the personal relationship part, which you didn't really have, at least in this such a explicit way before. And so naming, like I said, naming becomes really important. That Jewish student, I would always know Jewish students that were especially Orthodox or respectful, because when they're writing on their blue books, I know what's a blue book, on their exam papers, they would write G/D, because they were trained not to even to write the word God down. But of course they would write it in a way that would be unmistakable that they're talking about God. But we respect it in a way from that environment that we don't even write it down. That's the ancient Near Eastern view.
That kind of makes sense, and that kind of almost correlates beyond that to some of the early things we talked about in the first couple episodes of we're so limited by language, we're limited by name, so to try to encapsulate that by something like that.
And somebody wrote something about, they were telling me how I should pronounce the divine name, and they were telling me this spelling and that spelling, and then I wrote them and asked, I said, we don't even have the divine name written out with with consonants and vowels in the biblical period at all, and so we don't know how it was pronounced. That's the point. They had such a pronounced respect and fear for writing it. And so what would they do? They would write down either the name or the term Adonai. And of course, it becomes the four caps in English, capital. And when you see Lord in caps, that's the divine name that they put in place of the term Yahweh. And I think we should have a healthy respect for it. Because of that, we really don't know exactly how to pronounce it. And so, and of course, it became Latinized as Jehovah. Which is clearly a mistake, but we're also speaking in English. We're going to do the best we can with biblical names.
So it was like a reverence,
yes.
A reverence thing for them with the names.
And I think that we could learn something from that.
Yeah, no, that's great. And so then I guess my last question is: so you took 4 episodes. So do you want to try to sum up everything, or? I mean, I guess we can just tell them to look back, but I mean, maybe if you have one thing that you maybe didn't go off on as long as you wanted to, or one thing that you wanted to explain about the Nephilim in this topic. Maybe there's something, where you're like, Keagan, you should ask this question the whole time, and I was waiting.
Yeah, my eyes just scraped on the ceiling from my eyes rolling. It hurts a little bit right now. I have to close them, but I don't know. I think maybe I'll say one thing to tweak here. I want to clarify something. In Mesopotamia, the Apkallu are like the Nephilim, but not so much because of their size. They're not described as giants. They're described as fish heads. And one other thing that I actually had to apologize to Keagan for is that they are often described in iconographic forms with fish heads, but sometimes as bird-like creatures. And there's no explanation for it, by the way. And so, and it also tells me that, we've got 3,000 years of Mesopotamian traditions. And when you take all the texts together, there's lots of stuff that's mutually contradictory. But wouldn't you expect that in 3,000 years from different periods and different understandings and different scholars? And so they're all trying to make sense of this. And so it's not as if the Apkallu are sometimes fish head men and sometimes they're bird men. The iconographic depictions are different. The fact that there are 7 of them is important. Could they be giants? Well, Gilgamesh is described as a giant in the Dead Sea Scrolls. They probably didn't make that up out of anything, but I don't see the Apkallu are actually described as giant beings. They're like the Nephilim in the fact that they spawn hybrid beings. By the way, the Apkallu are not the hybrid beings. Some of the younger ones are. and there's no explanation for it. Like I told you, I think 2 episodes or last episode, is that they spawn hybrid beings, which are some kind called umanu, by the way, just if you want another name for it. So the Apkallu are the original ones, but also the ones that are hybrids. And they're not differentiated, at least in the text that we have. How are they like the Nephilim? They're like the Nephilim in later Jewish sources, that they impart wisdom and crafts and etc. and magic arts to human beings, not so much because of their size categories. Maybe they are big, maybe they are giants. And if that's the case, we don't have any texts that elaborate on that. I'm going to stick by that, by the way. But I don't know. I don't really know if I have a good summary for you, other than simply repeating myself, that this opens up a wide world in which to look at every biblical narrative with this in mind. Is there an ancient Near Eastern context to this? Is it elaborated on in later Jewish tradition? Because that helps inform me as to how they were interpreting this material. It doesn't mean their interpretations are always correct. Doesn't mean my interpretations are always going to be correct. I'm sure you'll let me know. But the point is that it just opens up a world. And again, it's the pattern I'm going to be using, in the same lens I'm going to be using for every different tradition, whether it's the flood, whether it's the law codes, whether it's the Tower of Babel. Hint, hint, the Tower of Babel is turning Babylonian wisdom and the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation story, it's turning it on its head. It's responding to it and showing, it literally turning everything upside down. The Nimrod story, the Abraham, the context of Abraham, all of these things, I'm going to try to look at, and then continue on. The book of Micah, whatever it is, wherever we get to, whatever you ask, I'm going to try to see it from a standpoint of the ancient Near East. And what is that going to do to it? It's going to tweak it and hopefully crystallize, some passages that are confusing. But as usual, it'll bring up other things that will cause tension. And I'm going to live with it and say, God, I'm doing my best. Help me understand. That's ultimately, and by the way, this is lots of knowledge stuff. To apply it, that's divine wisdom, and that's what you ultimately want to do. And so, why are we doing this? We're doing this so we will be wise in God's eyes and understand that, that the Nephilim and giants, they're evidently part of the divine narrative. And so I do want to understand this. I got invited to be part of God's family. I got to be grafted in to the seed of into the seed of Abraham. Both Gentiles and Jews did. There's 2 different graftings. Both of them got grafted in. I want to know about my family, and this is part of my family history now. And so I'm going to learn as much as I can.
Yeah, no, that's good. You want to get them with the teaser of what we're going into next?
Okay.
If you thought the Nephilim were weird, wait for this.
I can't believe how much information or misinformation is out there about the Anunnaki and the Nibiru. If you don't know who they are, then that's probably a good thing. But both Christians and other people who aren't Christians have become quite fascinated with this group of people, or I should say, people. These beings, the Anunnaki and the planet, the so-called planet Nibiru. I'm going to simply do what I did with the Apkallu, look at what Mesopotamian sources say about them to show you that it's quite underwhelming, and all of the fuss about them is probably stemming from Zecharia Sitchin's book. I think it called it The 12th Planet, which I have not read, by the way.
The 12th Planet, I think he has 2. I think there's 2 main books.
But that fellow, he studied cuneiform by himself and evidently sucked the cuneiform material out through his thumb. But he was not. In fact, when I looked at some of the things that he said, I can say, oh, I know exactly how he made that mistake. He made that mistake because of this principle in cuneiform that he didn't know about. And he created an entire structure, theology of the Anunnaki, who, by the way, the term Anunnaki is a Sumerian term which means princely seed. And sometimes Anunnaki means human beings, and sometimes it means the pantheon of gods. And I'm going to try to look at some of the text to see how they're described in Mesopotamian sources. And Nibiru, is it some really cool planet? My answer is Nibiru that comes from a term, an Akkadian term from a verbal form meaning to cross. And Nibiru is probably talking about the vernal equinox. And so anything that passes, any heavenly body that passes through the vernal equinox is a Nibiru. It's not a particular planet. It's not some cool planet where the Anunnaki made the human race and brought them here. That's a really cool idea. It'd be a great movie. It's just it's probably better for the Transformers, I guess. But
hey, careful! Don't give away. Don't give away all the spoilers.
Anyway, I think as Christians we should take a look at this material and be informed about what they are and what they aren't. And so I'll do my best. I know I'm going to be subjecting myself by doing it, but oh well. I'll just blame that on Keagan.
Hey, everybody does. It's super easy. I'm an easy target. So
he just asked me. I have to answer his questions.
Yeah, there you go. Well, it's Keagan's idea. He wanted the Anunnaki because I know about the vernal equinox and stuff, and I was super fascinated by it. So, anyways, yeah, no, it will be exciting. So make sure to tune in next week. We'll probably do like two, maybe 3 episodes of the Anunnaki and this planet Nibiru. And so that'll be kind of a different one, kind of a weird one for us. But as always, please make sure to write some questions down below if you have them. I've attached our email below too. So if you have questions about maybe any topic that we've covered, or you have like personal questions, please feel free either comment them in the comment section or reach out to us, Mark, and ask us your question. We'd be more than happy to take the time to respond, and we want to be as helpful as we can. So thank you guys again for tuning in. We're very excited to continue to bring you these kinds of resources, these kinds of topics, ultimately to help you, ultimately to feed you and your knowledge and your wisdom and your desire to read the Bible and Jesus. And so it's been fun and exciting, and we're excited for it to continue. So, as always, thanks for tuning in to the Buried Bible Podcast.